Okay, everyone's coming on.
Give me the green
This-
light whenever.
At this point, there are 47 people in.
Okay. All right, so we'll get started.
Great.
I'll call a meeting to order, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Zoom presentation tonight on parking proposals. I'll be handing it off to Jack Goldstein, the member of the committee, in a sec, but just a couple of words and some ground rules. First of all, we've had a couple of great and meetings, public meetings, and also public hearing on short-term rentals, where there were a lot of people, a lot of passion, just as this, I'm sure, will bring out. And they were incredibly well run, and everyone was really well behaved. And I hope tonight will be the same. Our intention here as the parking committee is to get feedback from you. This is a first step. There is a little misinformation out there, as generally happens. This is not the only time that the public will have to speak. This is a public meeting, which we thought we should have, and not just jump to a public hearing, so that we can get additional input from the public. So there's a lot to be taken in and digested tonight. The slideshow and stuff that was on the website, it was basically the base for Jack's, when Jack takes over and starts discussing, he'll be going through all of the slides and elaborating on them and explaining them. So sorry if things were a bit confusing on the website. It maybe could have been put up better, but tonight the intention is to make everything as clear as possible and to hear all of your concerns and answer as many questions as we can. So that's basically why we're here. We're here to hear you, but it isn't a public hearing, which it'll be just to hear you. It's a meeting so we can explain all of the work we've done and how we've come up with it, the history behind it, and so on. One thing, if people at the end of each proposal, I believe, will be taking comment. And at that time, if you raise your hand, there's a little hand icon that I think if you'd like to speak, you can hit, or if not, if you can gesture or whatever, so that you can, we will then admit you one at a time so that you can speak, and we can try to answer questions and or hear your concerns. Please just don't jump on. I don't know if that's possible. We've had that in the past. So everybody be patient. We'll hear everyone. State your name and your address, please, for the record, so we know the area you're from and your concerns, so we can keep a record of that. And that's about it. Just everybody, hopefully stay relaxed and hear us through, and we'll see how things come out. And with that said, Jack, please, you can take the reins.
Thanks, Dave. Can we have the PowerPoint up, please?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks. I'm Jack Goldstein, and I'm a member of the committee, and I've been asked to present this PowerPoint presentation. I'm a 14-year resident of the village of Cold Spring, and for many years I sold antiques in most of the collective antique shops on Main Street. And with COVID, though, many of them closed or several closed. And so I now operate an online antique business. And before we move forward, I'd like the other members of the committee to introduce themselves alphabetically.
No. Who's the first one in the alphabet, Jack?
Oh, why don't we just start with Rebecca, shall we?
Okay.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Ramirez. I am a resident here. I've been resident for about 3 years. I live on Church Street, 13 Church, and I am a business owner and also a participating member in a whole bunch of community committees.
Okay, Evan, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me, Jack?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Evan Hudson. I live at 19 High Street with my wife, Andrea Connor. We have 3 kids, We've lived in the village for about 11 years, and Andrea serves on the Historic District Review Board, and my main event is the Parking Committee recently. So happy to be here, and thank you.
Thanks. Dan, you on?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Valentine. I live at 6 Garden Street. I've lived my entire life in the village of Cold Spring, and I'm part of the fire department, have a background in law enforcement, and happy to serve the village in this capacity.
Thanks, Dan. Have I missed anyone? I don't think so. I'm showing up on some of your screens as Gretchen Dykstra because my computer crashed, and so I am gratefully borrowing Gretchen's computer to do this presentation. Could I have slide 3 up, please?
Good boy.
Great. I'd like to give you all just a quick bit of background of what brings us to this evening. The committee has been meeting on a weekly basis since March. And on April 22nd, we made a presentation to the village trustees, basically a progress report on where our thinking stood at that time. And the trustees encouraged us to go ahead and pursue and further refine the general proposals that we brought to them. It also became evident at that time that because of the complexity of this issue and sub-issues, that it was going to be necessary and advisable to have a status report for the public as well. And so that's the purpose of this meeting tonight. We've already received some very useful feedback from the materials that are posted on the village site, and we hope to get more feedback, positive or negative, from the people who are out there tonight. If you don't get a chance to speak tonight, or you want to think about things after we go through the proposals, you can you're welcome to submit your comments and questions in writing. There's someone out there with a child who needs to mute. If you can, please.
I believe I just muted it, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. Was that you, friend? Okay.
No, it wasn't me, but there was someone
Okay.
else that I was able to mute.
Okay, just to let you know what will come immediately after this meeting tonight is that the committee is going to reconvene next Wednesday. We meet Wednesday nights at 6:30 and sift through the comments and the concerns and the questions and the ideas. And that process will result in another set of documents that will also be posted on the village site. So let me talk a bit generally about, could I have let me see. Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about the approach that the committee took to this fairly complex issue.
Hold on for a second. I believe.
Jack, you went to
Hello?
mute.
Let me find, there we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Paul.
Okay, it's new computer for me. In general, the committee decided to adopt a management solution, a comprehensive management solution, but nevertheless a management solution to this very complex problem rather than an infrastructure solution. So you accept in some very, very small instances that involve perhaps repaving areas, and the like, and the fact that new signs will be needed. There are no recommendations in the proposal as yet, and are unlikely to be made, any large construction projects or any infrastructure solutions to this problem. So what we're dealing with tonight and going forward is basically trying to come up with a meaningful and effective allocation of a scarce resource, which parking has definitely become on certain days, certain times of the year in the village. So also we are responding in some large measure to worst case scenarios, knowing that they are not going to pertain the entire year. You should also be aware of the fact that these recommendations are unanimous. The committee members represent various points of view and experiences in the village, but we have managed to achieve a consensus up to this point on how we think this problem can be best managed. Also, no matter what the eventual final proposals are, and if they're enacted by the village trustees, there's going to have to be a testing period of this. We won't really know how effective things are or what our recommendations, how effective our recommendations have been until they're actually put to the test for a reasonable period of time. But most of what we're proposing tonight is reversible, changeable, and flexible. And so we will be following up as a committee and as a community, I hope, on what the actual impact is once these proposals are finalized and approved by the village and implemented. So let me give you a bit of history on parts of this. As I say, it's a many, it's a segmented problem. In 2003, the village passed the first law to establish residential parking permits on the area west of the railroad tracks. And that has been in place ever since 2003. In 2015, the village approved an expansion of the residential permit parking area to include 11 streets east of the railroad tracks. And those streets are set down specifically in the legislation that was sent to Albany as is required. And those are the streets that we are dealing with to this day as being included in this expansion. Last summer and autumn, I'm sure all of you remember, we experienced a dramatic increase in tourism leading to traffic jams and sometimes altercations and sort of a limited chaotic situation. And one of the temporary solutions to that was to, for one weekend, allow parking, all-day parking in Mayor's Park. And it was financially a success for the village, but there was negative reaction to the continued use of a park for those purposes. So we find ourselves with for as much as we can tell, a growing problem of increased tourism here. A lot of it seems to be arriving by car. And so we've reached the point where we feel, and when I say we, I mean the trustees and the committees in response to them, need to take some further action. In terms of the constituents, we identified a group of constituents that we thought represented the majority of people who might be personally affected by whatever we did with parking. And one of them is the constituency or the residents within that or on that 11th Street expansion of the parking permit area. Another constituency is the local non-permit holders, people who drive into the village but don't live with it, are local but don't live within the 11th Street, on the 11th Streets. The merchants and employees on Main Street, clearly impacted. Main Street residents, we have identified about 54 units on Main Street on the second and third floors of buildings. And then, of course, visitors who are coming to us. So those were the constituents that we determined were the ones that we were going to try and respond to. So following that, following the getting our feet wet in terms of what the history of the issue was and identifying constituencies, we did our research, both exploring studies that had been done in the past by the village and by seeking informed counsel. The New York State Conference of Mayors, for instance, has been very helpful to us, and also to speak with professionals in the field, with industry suppliers who are in the parking business, and to villages, nearby villages and towns that have also dealt with the issues. And that process, in short, led to the draft proposals that you're seeing tonight. So can I have the goals slide, please? Is that 4? All right. Basically, our goals, we boiled down our goals into these 3. One is to reduce the parking hassles that most people experience during those peak times, whether they live in side streets or they're on Main Street, or they're merchants, or their employees and the tourists. Number 2 is to reduce pollution. Last summer, what we saw was a lot of traffic jamming, a lot of idling, a lot of circling, and all of that produces additional greenhouse gas emissions, and it can't go on. So something needs to be put in place that will help reverse that trend, and underlying that is, we think, the need to segment out parking so that short-term parking and people who, and with a turnover of certain parking spaces, be separated from long and all-day parking, and informing the public of where those different parking options are. And thirdly, to increase the village's share of the tourism revenue. As you may know, Putnam County is one of the few counties in New York State that does not return sales tax revenues to the sources of the sales tax. And so we receive none of the sales tax revenue, and we are a considerable contributor of it, back from the county. We have in the past received $7,500 a year out of the general revenues, specifically earmarked for garbage pickup on weekends. But with the decrease in revenues last year due to COVID, that $7,500 contribution was terminated. And so while the village is in a situation of having to bear the cost and inconvenience and policing and management of increased tourism, and the county is receiving the benefit of the increased tax dollars that increased tourism is bringing, the village itself does not benefit financially directly. There are employment benefits, of course, and others. But generally speaking, we are cut out of the revenue stream that is flowing in greater and greater magnitude now from tourism. And so we feel that we needed to integrate that situation into whatever goals that we recommended for parking. So next slide. Thank you. We have 4 proposals that we want to discuss with you tonight. And one of the, it's been pointed out to me as the author of this PowerPoint that there is some excuse me, inexact language in it. And I take full responsibility for that. One example of that is in proposal number 1, rather than expand the residential parking permit. In fact, that was done in 2015, so it should read implement the residential parking permit expansion. And we will deal with these 4 recommendations separately. The second proposal is to implement a virtual meter parking system on Main Street and limited side streets and some remote locations. And a virtual metering system is an app-based system. It does not involve any hardware to speak of. There are no meters, physical meters on the street. And there are many advantages to that kind of a system, but it is a system that takes some getting used to. And as I said before, it does involve some signage, primarily on the part of the vendor. Then the third recommendation is to specifically dedicate areas of free and reserved parking meant to provide parking to a whole group of people who are not able or willing, interested in a app-based parking system, paid parking system. So for instance, those who don't have smartphones and those who are unbanked, plus those who just don't want to have to pay, and those who will not be getting permits in these 11 streets. So and also for longer term parking uses. So that is proposal number 3. And proposal number 4 is a communications campaign. No matter what we do, and we hope we'll do it this year, by the way, as to begin a testing period of it, at least, is that we need to have a very thorough communications campaign to make people aware of these parking changes. And we'll go into what we're going to recommend in terms of that communications campaign. So may I have the next slide, please? This proposal overview, which in the table of contents just reads map, and it should be a map of the proposal overview, gives you a sense, and it's a general sense, of where the various parking allocations we are going to recommend, where we're going to recommend them. So you see in the orange lines, those identify the 11 streets that were approved in 2015 for residential permit parking. The blue lines, and Main Street is the largest of those, plus areas off Main, and several of those have been left out. There are a few spaces on High Street, a few spaces on Furnace Street that would be proposed to be metered, and a few spaces on Northern Avenue between Church and Fair that would be given over to metering. But generally, it's a Main Street proposal, but also includes some remote areas. The village parking lot near Riverview would be included and transferred over to the system rather than the kiosk system that exists now. And we are recommending that the area outside Mayor's Park, that long strip of head-in diagonal parking, be included as a metered spot as well. And then the third category of parking, the free and dedicated zones, would include areas on the boulevard, on Kemble Avenue. They are marked in green. On a certain part of the area adjacent to the 11th Street, or included in the 11th Street residential parking area. Depot Square would remain as it is. And so this map is simply to illustrate where the basic balance of the different kinds of parking and the place that they would play in terms of the village's ebb and flow. Okay. Okay, so the first proposal is to implement the residential parking program for the 11 streets that were approved in 2015. And those 11 streets are specifically Railroad Street, Stone, Cross, Garden, Church, High Street, Furnace, Rock, Kemble, and Kemble from Main Street to the intersection of Rock and Wall. The state law requires a minimum of 20% of the parking spaces in a residential parking area. 20% needs to be reserved for non-residents. And that 20% of the spaces needs to be treated like the rest of the spaces in the residential parking area. The hours of the permitting in the residential parking area would be from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a daily basis, 365 days a year. That in order to park in those designated areas, you would need a permit basically hanging on your rear view mirror, or you would be ticketed, could be ticketed, let me say. The permit fee we're proposing is $10 a year, and the enforcement of this system would be local enforcement. Our local police would be the enforcer of the system. So can we go on to the, yeah. Okay, here is a detailed map, albeit at this point preliminary, of one proposal of where these various parking places would be within those 11 streets. And let me give you a sense of what we're dealing with here, or what the committee has been dealing with, because we have a supply and demand situation, a simple one. There are two, based on the fact that parking spaces in the village are required to be 18 feet in length. On the 11 streets, there are 247 parking spaces, and 20% of them have to be left to non-residents, so that's 49 spaces, which leaves 198 spaces within this parking area available for permits. So that 198 is a key number. What we did to begin with was to adopt an allocation formula of making eligible a single permit for any address on the streets with off-street parking. So if you lived on Church Street and you had off-street parking, and your address was 21, it was a single address, you would be eligible to apply for one parking permit. If you lived in that same address and you had no off-street parking, you would be eligible to apply for two permits. So by surveying all 11 streets, there are 122 residences that would be eligible for one permit and 32 that would be eligible for a second permit, which means that of the 198, we have used up or reached the point of 154 permits, And that leaves 44 permits available in the parking area. We did also look at water users within the area, which is different from single addresses, because there are properties within the area that have more than one family unit on the property. By our count, there are 10 with 2 family units and 2 properties with 3 family units and 2 with 4 family units on the property. There is one with 6, but that has a lot of off-street parking already. So it is possible and likely, depending on that, that we're using up another 20 parking spaces of the 44. And we have to anticipate the needs of guests and of service calls during the day. So you see what we're doing, what we need to do is to try and allocate these permits in a fair and we hope effective way. Now, you know, there are conditions involved in this. The village can issue more permits for more permits than there are spaces. No one anticipates that everybody with a permit will be parking on the street at the same time every day. And not everybody who's eligible for a permit is necessarily going to apply for one. Someone with 2 off-street spaces may not want to apply for one. So there is flexibility in this, and I know I'm throwing numbers at you, but I just want you to understand, we want you to understand that there is a formula at work here that is going to need to be agreed upon in order to make the distribution of these permits fair and effective. Okay, so I think this is a good time to stop for questions. I'm happy to go back over this, and I will leave it up to whoever is managing the question.
I guess that's where I'm going to jump in. The first person who's had a hand up is Bo Bell.
Okay.
Bo, please unmute yourself, state your name and address.
Hey there, everyone. This is Bo Bell. I live at 50 Main Street. I will probably be raising my hand a few times tonight. I had a quick question for Jack regarding this map, or maybe a couple of questions. The first is, can you explain why the original plan excluded Main Street from the application to New York State of the residential parking permit program? Because that, I don't think that's been clearly explained, why these 11 streets were chosen and the others, such as Main Street, were not included in that plan. And also Fair Street, which, as we know, doesn't have parking except when the church takes it over. The second question is, I wanted to ask if you can explain with the map we're looking at. You mentioned about the 80% versus 20%. Is it required that the 80 and 20 have to be on particular streets based on residents, or is this just something that you and the committee drew up based on what you thought would work best in terms of how you allocate those 20% of free spaces versus the 80% of the privileged permitted spaces? And the third question I have is, are the blue spaces, which are designated to be metered, are those excluded by New York State law from the residential parking permit program, or are those spaces that are available for the permit program, but you chose in the metering plan to include to be metered for a revenue or any other purpose? Thank you. I will let you respond.
Okay. Number one, I was not involved in this in 2015, so I can't give you the history on why these specific 11 streets were selected. I can, I think, answer your question regarding Main Street, and that is that these side streets are R1 districts, and Main Street is a B1 district. It is a a business district, and whereas you can have uses that are acceptable in an R1 district, the preponderance of uses on Main Street are mercantile, are merchant uses. And so it was not considered, I'm assuming now, I mean, it simply makes sense, Bo, that because it is a different zoning designation and one that is dedicated primarily to, as our central business district, that it wasn't deemed to be primarily a residential area, and therefore it was left out of the 11 street mapping. What was your second one? Your second question, Bo.
The second question was, how did you achieve the, and I appreciate that. I'm wondering maybe if just as a second comment, if anyone on the board or otherwise could give us some background before the next meeting in the follow-up period, why that was chosen and why Main Street was left out, that would be helpful. The second question was, how did you come to the designation that of the 80% versus 20% of permit versus free, the 80% would be on the street, the 20% would be, yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. We consulted with the New York Conference of Mayors as to the flexibility, the rules governing the actual positioning of the 20% as opposed to the 80%. And basically, there are no rules other than, in terms of the micro location of these different parking spaces, and so it's the committee recommendation that they be grouped together in an area that would be, for one thing, much easier to identify through signage, and for another to be easier to enforce. And so the 20% allocations have been grouped together in those marked green, mostly around, well, exclusively around Haldane and Northern. Haldane and Northern are the 20%. We also assume, Bo, that I don't know that, we have a large population of people who park all day long because they're going hiking. And so it seemed if that's going to be the case, it has been the case. And again, we don't know whether this will prove the best allocation, but it seemed better to try to separate out those non-permit long-term parkers from the resident permit parkers on the 11th Street. But we don't have to do it that way. You could have 20% on each street, although I think that's a more chaotic approach personally, that's all.
May I jump in? I'm sorry, Jack and Bo.
Yeah.
There are 6 people waiting for questions. I know we want to limit the amount of time for questions in each section. So I'm going to ask if people could limit your questions to one part, and if you have additional questions, I think we'll have more time at the end, if that's correct.
Okay, and Bo, to answer the third quickly, the legislation does not prohibit the use of some of those spaces for metering. Okay.
Okay,
Just
next,
give us
Lauren.
an idea of
Lauren?
time. You have 4 minutes left of the 10 minutes we allocated for.
Okay, all right.
We have 6 people who have hands up, so we may want to just squish a little bit on this.
Okay.
Let me move on. Lauren Daisley.
Hi there.
Please unmute yourself and give us your name and address.
Thanks very much. My name's Lauren Daisley. I live at 128 East Mountain Road South. Prior to that, I lived right downtown in the village. We've been here for about 11 years. My question is, in what way are Phillipstown residents who live outside the village going to be treated differently than tourists, both because we do contribute to the tax revenue and for the sense of community? It almost seems like there might be a second tax if we also have to pay for metered parking, and also just how we can maintain this sense of connectedness so that people who might live too far to walk into the village could still come down and participate without too many barriers, financial or otherwise.
Okay, it's a valid question, Lauren, and if you can wait until we get into the parking metered proposal, I think some of your concerns will be answered then.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Michelle McCoy, please unmute yourself and give your name and address.
Shush. Okay, Michelle McCoy, I'm at 25 Mountain Avenue in the village, not directly affected by this district. So I'm on the east side of 9D. My question is, are we encouraging or discouraging using the Metro North lot, which is completely free on weekends? And how much is that being utilized right now? Just because it's more difficult to get to, that you have to go down Main Street. Has the board considered what's going on with the Metro North lot and its utilization as part of this market?
Yes, yes. And when we get to the third proposal, we'll discuss that then. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
James Hartford.
Hi, James Hartford at 5 Furnace Street, as well as 178 Main Street, where my business is located. So I'm doubly affected by this, and I'm quite concerned because there isn't enough parking on Furnace Street for all of the residents who live there as it is. The other thing is I have employees that park on Main Street basically from 8:30 till 5:30, Monday through Friday. And there has never been a problem for my employees to park. And they're not crowding people out who would be shopping here otherwise. But this would cause a lot of headache for them. It's an untenable situation that you're creating for us.
Well, wait, James, number one, it may be that, I mean, Furnace Street is part of the 11th, street expansion. And so it would be there, essentially we're showing one perhaps metered space right off Main Street, but essentially it would be reserved for residents and not visitors. Okay, so I think that would improve the situation. In regard to your second question about your employee parking, again, let's wait until we get to metered parking. And I think that you will see that the problem that you are legitimately concerned about is probably can be resolved. Okay.
Furnace Street, we already lost one space when the street was repaved.
Right.
One parking space was removed. Now you're taking another one away from the
Well, not necessarily are we taking it. Okay. That's where it's proposed now. But, we're here to listen to the specific concerns of the residents. And so certainly I have, and I'm sure every member of the committee has taken note of the fact that Furnace may not be a great place for a metered spot. Okay.
You mentioned 365 days that these would be in place. So, I mean, I fail to see the need for, at least on my end of Main Street, to create metering.
Okay.
Other than pushing people further up the hill, I guess, once you start to restrict.
Okay, but that
we did discuss this a lot, and I think you'll be satisfied a little bit with what the information that you see in the rest of the proposal. I hear your concern, and we all do hear your concerns, especially, Jack and I understand a lot of the needs of the business owners working closely with the chamber. So hopefully you will see that we did really take a look at what you're talking about.
Well, I look forward to it because I'm gravely concerned right now.
We are out of the 10 minutes. If we can move forward, and we'll take additional questions after the second part of the proposal.
Okay. So may I have the next slide?
Trying to move it forward, Jack. I'm having a problem.
Oh, no.
Oops. For some reason, it's frozen on me. I'm going to stop it and restart it.
Okay. May we still speak?
Yeah.
Okay, so if there's one more question we can take now.
Paul Henderson, please. Unmute yourself and give your address. Paul Henderson.
Unmute.
Sorry, I had a hard time finding it again once it transitioned. So first of all, I want to really express appreciation for the committee who's worked on this. I know what it's involved in getting into the depth of it. And Jack, you've certainly provided a very articulate and comprehensive view.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, Paul, could you give your address, please?
Sure, 14 Stone.
Thank you.
So very quickly on 14 Stone, as far as I see it from the map in front of me, you have 11 parking spaces on the east side of the street. And I believe, I just lost the map because it went to, I just lost the map. I believe you have 8 parking places on the west side of the street. My question for you is the 3 additional parking places, I agree with your 11 and 5 on the west side. The additional parking places seem to be indicated between Railroad and Cross. And I would say that having had the construction across the street recently, we know from very long experience that it's impossible for us to get out of our driveway if there is parking there. At the same time, the street is only 17.5 feet wide. And if we provide enough parking for parking on both sides, there's barely enough room to get through, and trucks always coming up Railroad get stuck on Stone Street. So my comment is that I would like you to really re-look at that idea of having those 3 additional parking. At the same time, I have other comments. That's not really a question, but my one question is there a time limit on these parking spaces that you are providing for your quote unquote hikers? And I also see that the baseball field parking is not part of this map.
Well, you mean the Mayor's Park?
No, on Morris Avenue.
Well, I'll get to that as well, Paul, because that's under discussion at the moment. But it hasn't gone far enough along that we felt we could, identify it. But we are aware of it. Dave has been speaking with Haldane, on a regular basis, and we hope that we will come to an agreement on that site. As to the other issue you raised, thank you very much, about the difficulty of having the parking on both sides of the street. This is exactly the kind of information and feedback that we need so that we're not making situations worse.
Jack, if I could answer that, Paul, I think the reason why the 3 they're shown there, I put this map together and it was hard to fit all of the text in there. So those parking areas, the 3 that you see, those aren't supposed to be there. They're moved down to the other side between Railroad and Main Street. Does that make sense?
It does, except that when I counted the parking places, that is far exceeds the available space, unless you're changing the signage that you have on the Main Street end of it on the west side.
Yeah, I don't know exactly.
I count 11 on the east and 5 on the west. I unfortunately have to be very familiar with this because the other issue that we have is that, and this is a marking issue, is that each driveway is marked differently, so that wide driveways tend to have a very large X and narrow driveways tend to be very small. And it's virtually impossible on a weekend to get out of our driveway when more people are parked on Stone Street, from experience.
Okay.
So we can come back to this, but I was wondering if it was a graphical issue, but I think it's not when I count the spaces.
But just to answer your question, the 3 parking spots are not between Railroad and Cross Street. That should be, it's just because for lack of space on the map.
Right, and like I said, there are 5 spaces on the west side of Stone between Main and Railroad, not 8.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue. I'm just saying that you're concerned with you can't pull out of your driveway, but those areas that we're talking about are the 3 that are shown.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that they're not there. That'll make life easier. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and it's noted, and we will check it out. Marie, can we go on?
There you go. There you go.
Thank you. This is a summary of the proposed paid parking recommendations. And let me just, again, give you briefly some background on this, that we did a lot of research on various methods of paid parking. And ultimately, first of all, we decided in committee that it was not productive to pursue anything that required hardware of any major kind. The kiosks that, for instance, in the municipal lot, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, were $10,000 for that one kiosk. And aside from that, it's ugly street furniture. So we felt that we should at least pursue, to the extent that we possibly could, adopting a virtual metered parking system, which would be app-based and therefore not require any of those expensive to buy and expensive to maintain capital elements to them. We interviewed 3 companies that are well respected in this field. Park Mobile was the company that the committee felt offered the most, both in terms of their installation and their back office coordination. And as with all virtual systems, the flexibility. With a virtual system, with an app-based metered system, you can switch on a day's notice the hours that the metering would be enforced. You can switch the cost of the metering. They are completely flexible, these systems. And so it is very likely that the metering costs and the effective times of the metering would change from perhaps season to season or day to day or week to week, based on the experience that we get if we go ahead with a testing proposal. Also, it is a very economical way to go, in that the app company, in this case Park Mobile, provides at no cost all of the signage for the metering, and they take 35 cents per transaction, and the rest of the revenue, minus whatever credit card fees there are attached to the individual purchase of the space. The rest of the revenue goes to the village. And we spoke with, I think it was 6, it may have been 8 towns and villages nearby us. It was Cortland and Hastings on Hudson and Cornwall, who all have to some extent utilized Park Mobile. And the reports back on the company were extremely positive, of easy to work with and responsible, and their monthly reports were always on time and easy to read, as were the deposits made into the designated accounts. So it's the committee's recommendation that if we move ahead, if the village moves ahead with the paid parking proposal, that we engage Park Mobile to implement it for us, to be the company of choice. Now, again, what we are proposing here, and this chart is divided into the major areas that are likely to be, that we are proposing be metered. And so from Main Street up to 9D and to Depot Square, metering would only be required, payment would only be required on weekends and holidays. And on weekends and holidays, it would be from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The rate that we're proposing, based on our discussions with Park Mobile, is $2.50 an hour, and there would be a 3-hour maximum. So that builds in the need for turnover, which we feel is a positive thing in terms of both shopping on Main Street and also making spaces available. in the municipal lot, which would be converted over to the same system. Again, holidays and weekends would be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at $2.50 an hour for the first 3 hours, and $3, excuse me, for 4 hours or more. But you could stay there. There would be no time limit. You could stay there overnight. On weekends and holidays from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m., in other words, overnight, basically, $1.25 an hour. Again, you could stay the entire time. And for 24 hours a day on holidays and weekdays, $1.25 an hour. So holidays and weekends, oh, excuse me, on weekdays, Monday through Friday, it's unlimited parking there for $1.25 an hour rather than the current $1 an hour. On Mayor's Park exterior, which is the head-in parking, again, weekends and holidays, it would be the same situation as Mayor's Park. Excuse me, as the municipal lot, 9 to 5 on weekends, with $2.50 for the first 3 hours and $3 for 4 hours. From 5 to 9 on weekends and holidays, $1.25 an hour, unlimited. And on weekdays, it's $1.25 an hour for 24 hours. Here comes in Haldane, as I said before, there have been discussions ongoing with Haldane that would involve the parking on 9D above the field there. There has been no final agreement reached on it, but we are hoping that there will be. So I think it's time to stop and take questions again on this paid parking proposal. Let me also say before I do that, that there will be 15-minute parking on Main Street that is not metered and would be available therefore for those quick trips in to pick up something on Main Street, for instance, which it would be important certainly on weekends. During the weekdays, there would be no metering on Main Street. And so the current situation would prevail on Main Street. So do we have questions on this proposal?
Before you go, just one little update. I did hear from Dr. Benante today regarding the Haldane parking, and they would like to just postpone getting involved until they see how this year plays out.
Okay. So we will scratch Haldane School from the next version of this, or just leave it to be determined. But obviously it won't be this year. So thanks, Dave.
Okay, T. Fife, please identify yourself and your address and unmute yourself. Hello?
Hi, thank you, Trustee Murphy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, I just had one bit of small housekeeping. At the beginning of the meeting, the members of the committee were asked to identify themselves, and I took that as Mr. Valentine, Ms. Ramirez, and also Mr. Hudson. That's 3 people. Are there 5 people in the committee?
Yes, I introduced myself.
Sorry, Jack as well. And then are there any other members of the committee?
Yes, the mayor and the deputy mayor are both part of the committee.
Gotcha. And then, sorry, just again for context, when this entire proposal, thank you, moves towards whatever the final approval stages are, the body that would vote on that is limited to the trustees and the mayor.
Yes, that's correct.
So the committee that's creating the proposal is comprised of members that will also be in the end evaluating and approving or disapproving their own proposal.
Of course, that's representative democracy.
You could look at it that way.
Okay, thank you. I just
sorry.
Understand.
Travis, could you give us your address?
Oh yes, sorry. Travis Fife, 16 Stone Street.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next, Katie, Paul, and Judine. Can somebody who's speaking identify yourself and your address, please?
Hi, my name's Catherine Cox and I live on Northern Avenue in the Springbrook condos. Just wondering if anyone in my complex will be entitled to any residential parking passes, as many of us use Northern Avenue for parking right now. You said that people with driveways would be able to get a residential parking pass, so I'm wondering if we would too. And we've also had spots taken away from us from Fair Street and the municipal lot. We're running out of room, and it just seems like everyone's taking it away from us.
Katie, the condo was not included in the 11th Street expansion back in 2015, and so you are not. I don't want to use the word entitled, but you're not eligible for the permits.
But then why are you taking away Northern Avenue spaces from us?
Well, no, Northern Avenue is in most of Northern Avenue will be non-permit parking spaces. That area marked in green on the first map will be non-permit parking areas, so you can park there.
Okay, I understand that. If I would just ask that maybe those metered parking spots could be taken away too, because everyone's going to be coming over to our area and we're not going to have the parking spots we used to have to park in.
Yeah, it's an issue, okay, so that we're aware of. And so again, duly noted, and it will be seriously discussed, okay?
Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Caitlin Louvier.
Hi.
Please, hi.
So I don't live in Cold Spring, but I work at the Cold Spring General Store, and I have for the past 2 years. I just wanted to ask if this is the section where I can talk about the employee parking of the businesses on Main.
The what parking?
Employee parking. You said there was a certain section.
No, if you can wait until the third proposal, and I'll address it, and then if you still have a question,
Okay.
fire away. Yeah.
I do not mind waiting. Okay, I just wanted to check.
Okay.
Okay, last, Paul Henderson is back on. Paul, one more time, your name and address, please. Paul?
My name is Paul Henderson from 14 Stone Street. Again, I want to express the extreme appreciation for all the work of the committee members. I have two comments, questions. One is there going to be ADA parking, or is there a state stipulation for providing ADA parking that is in a certain area or free? And two, because we have a ongoing issue with this in the village, what is the enforcement going to be for metered parking and for these time limits? Thank you.
So I can answer the ADA, Paul. ADA, people with an ADA permit will be permitted to legally park in the residential parking areas. Does that answer your question about ADA?
Sorry, I unmuted myself. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. And yes, go ahead.
Dan, can you maybe sort of jump in here about the enforcement on the metered parking?
Sure. Cold Spring Police Department and their officers in the parking enforcement would do normal patrols as they do on the weekends, similar to the parking enforcement officer that walks up and down Main Street that checks to see if cars have been parked for more than 4 hours on the streets or have expired inspections. They would be able to check through the application on their phone to see what vehicles are parked or expired. So they would know who would be in violation, and they would issue a ticket to those vehicles in violation in the metered parking spaces. And for the residential parking permit areas, anyone who is not displaying a permit to park in that area would also be subjected to a parking ticket.
Great, thank you very much. No, I would say that I have a fair amount of experience with the virtual parking in other cities, including New York City, and it's very successful. And that's great that the enforcement will also have the Park Mobile or whichever system you use notifications about who might be in violation, because that should expedite that process. Thank you.
Jack, there are no more questions at this time.
Okay, so if we can move on now to the next proposal.
Any way that I can ask a
Greg, so I didn't see your hand.
hand signal?
Yeah, there on the bottom of your screen where it says reactions, there's a hand signal, but Craig, please identify yourself and your address.
I apologize there, Fran. I did not see this hand signal section.
No problem, go.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Jack, as well. Craig Machewski, 66 Main Street. I thank you so much. Jack, what a wonderful presentation. I can't imagine the time and effort and consideration that it took to put this together. It's absolutely an unbelievable piece of work that you guys have done here. I wrote down a few things. Into what you were speaking of, and I'm only going to try to answer a few things in which starting from a very top point where you said traffic circle village, possibly not a police officer, but a traffic enforcement, a paid person like a ticket person could be at the top of Main Street where they could be redirecting traffic to other parking locations instead of allowing them to drive down Main Street where there may not be parking. Just an idea, just a way to move traffic away from Main Street as it's already busy.
Leave the door
open. As far as this mobile app that you talked about, just to let you know from a business point of view, the Wi-Fi and the optimum service in the village most often is terrible. So downloading an app or something of that may be extremely frustrating to people pulling into our community. I know that we have 2 churches within this geographic area, and churches, I don't know where this falls, and I'm sure it's complicated like everything in the world, but churches are tax-free. They pay no taxes. Maybe their parking lots should also be free. They don't pay taxes. Maybe we can also look at compact spots that may also open up a few other locations throughout our village instead of allowing these 18-foot spots as you spoke of. So many cars today are much smaller and require less parking ability. I know that requires you to go back to the drawing board, but I thought I would.
Craig, if I could address 2 of your points, Craig. So the first point is the app you can download if Wi-Fi is not available. There'll be a toll-free number with an AVR that will walk you through the application to park. Number 1. Number 2, there will not be parking spaces. We're not going to mark off 18-foot parking spaces anywhere in the village. So if compact cars pull in, there'll be more space for someone else to park.
I'm sorry, I thought I had something about 18-foot spots.
That was used to determine the number of spaces on a particular street.
Oh, okay, understood. My last 2 spots are, as a fellow, I may not live in the village, but as someone who has a business in Cold Spring, I live in Cold Spring and I've been here 7 years. I know that is not much time, but all we hear from locals is about parking and the troubles of parking, that's all I hear. It could be a Monday on a rainy day, and that's all you hear is about the parking issue. It frightens me utterly if we are to propose such strict regulations that there could be confused even where they might even be able to park. I just want you to keep that in mind because they are afraid to even come to the village on a day that tourisms aren't even here. And the last point I bring up is from Street, who also pointed up that there are being proposal and then 2 people voting on their own proposal. That sounds a bit like a conflict of interest to me. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentation.
I'm well.
Jack, back. Go ahead, Jack.
I'm just saying, I think, Craig, that there, policymakers in a representative democracy are often representatives who are elected. If you're in the House of Representatives, then you submit a bill, you write a bill, you're going to vote on it if it's your bill. So,
yeah, but the pool is much greater.
Well, that's not really the point. The point is the principal point of how we are governed in a representative democracy. So I don't think conflict of interest is an appropriate term just because elected officials have opinions on certain things. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the constitutionality of our parking proposal. Okay.
No more questions, Jack.
Okay, thanks. Proposal 3 has to do with the reservation of space for some of the constituencies that we really haven't dealt with yet, and or not in total yet. And this is a list of those which are currently in the in process of consideration. And they include here 20% of the unpermitted space, the open space for the general public in the 11th Street area. Depot Square has 13 spaces. Metro North came up in a couple of comments. Dave deserves to be congratulated on finally achieving something that I know has been on the table for many years, and that is Metro North has agreed to give the village 50 spaces on weekends and advertise and enable the village to advertise those 50 spaces. That would be free parking all day long. And so that adds considerably to the number of unregulated, if you want to call it, spaces on weekends. The boulevard, if you recall at the map at the earlier part of the presentation, the boulevard has potentially 31 spaces, and Campbell Avenue headed toward the Foundry Preserve 60 spaces. And I think, Katie, it was an answer to your question about employee parking. The recommendation will be that those a substantial number of those 31 spaces and those 60 spaces would be available only for a special permit. And that special permit, employees on Main Street would be eligible for that special permit, and residential tenants on Main Street would be available for those special permits. So on weekends, you at the village, at the general store would have a longer walk because you would be down on Kemble or the boulevard, and so would other employees have that longer work, but it would be a reserved space for you. During weekdays, as we've gone through, there would be no change in the regulations governing on-street parking on Main Street for employees or not. So what we've tried to do in response to the need of employees to be able to feel comfortable about their parking situation would be to basically dedicate a large number of those 91 spaces and with a special permit. Lastly, there's the highway department lot, which is directly behind the municipal lot. And it is at the moment piled up with things, but the village is exploring clearing. There's a mass of debris there, clearing that. And that would be added to this body of free parking, basically. So that is the third proposal, is that we do in fact designate and reserve parking for the various groups in these, not all of these spaces, but in a large number of these spaces. So happy to take questions on proposal 3 now.
Okay, Linda Bolte, please identify yourself and your address.
Hi, my name is Linda Bolte. I'm at 160 East Mountain Road South. I've been here for almost 24 years. We've always gone down into the village, and it has become quite an issue. And I think it's mainly because of all these hikers coming into the township. And I think that's the root of the problem for all of us. And I feel like we're being pushed out, and I feel our businesses are fortunate to have them coming in to give them business. But at the same time, like, my daughter now works in the town, and where, like, are the businesses going to get a certain amount of reserved spaces for their employees? Or is it going to be like they're going to have to be on a rotation? Like, well, sorry, but you know, you can't park here because we don't have enough passes. How's that going to work?
Well, we haven't worked out the details yet, but the intention is that businesses would apply for a certain number of permits based on the number of their employees. And the permits would be on a monthly basis. As you probably know, and your daughter's experience would probably confirm, that the number of employees employed at any given time depends on the time of year, and it depends on the kind of business that we're involved. So during the height of the tourist season, the restaurants are employing a significant number of employees. Now, the way they get to work differs from restaurant to restaurant, from week to week, and the rest of it, because some of those employees are going to be walking in, some of those employees are going to be dropped off, some are going to be driving in, and some maybe even coming up on the train. So all we can do is try and predict a certain number based on our survey of the numbers of employees on a maximum busy summer day, tourist day, that would need the parking, and see if that's sufficient or not. But it will depend on the employer to apply for the permit based upon their particular situation. And at the present time, that's as specific as we can be. And it is going to take some testing out period to see if that's workable or not. It may not be that it's going to be a real crunch on many days, but it may be that maybe we will run out of spaces. But again, that's going to have to be an experiential determination, I think.
Will the businesses be charged for the permit parking?
They will. We haven't come to a figure but we want to make it de minimis, to tell you the truth, and we don't think that should be passed on to the employee. But that may be ultimately the decision of the business. But we're not doing this part of it. We are doing the metered part of it to make money for the village. No question about that. This part of it we are not doing to make money for the village. We're doing it to try and accommodate the constituencies that we identified that needed to be specifically addressed, the needs of those specific constituencies. Okay.
What about when there's a baseball game down at town and your kid's in a baseball game at Mayor's Park or at 9D Field? Are you gonna have to pay?
Linda, can I just interject here for a second? I just wanted to point out to everybody in the meeting right now that this is just a proposal for 11 streets. So just keep in mind that there's still parking, and the Main Street, area. Just keep in mind there's still parking available that is not being changed, past the stop light. So there's still other additional parking. Take a look at this is a small portion.
And in answer to your question about the games, no. The answer is simply no. You would not have, the cones would be put up in those spaces, and there would be no parking, no metered parking there. Okay.
Okay, Judith Kepner Rose, please unmute yourself, give your name and address.
Hi, Judith Rose, 7 Marion Avenue, and also we own a stretch of land on Campbell that we're planning on building on. And my question is, the 60 spaces on Campbell, are they all going to be on the side of the road where they are now, or are you going to try to park on both sides?
No. There's been no discussion of jumping over to the other side of the road. It would simply follow where the spaces are now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lauren Daisley.
Thank you. Lauren Daisley at 128 East Mountain Road South. Thank you again for this tremendous effort. I know this is no small undertaking you're in the midst of. I'm just hoping to get clarity for these proposed free and dedicated parking spaces. Would Phillipstown residents who don't live in the village apply to park in these spaces, or they would be available to us without permit?
They would be available, except for those which I've just mentioned, which will be dedicated to residents on Main Street and to employees. The rest are simply available, would simply be available.
Whether or not you're a resident.
That's correct.
Okay, so really there is no, and I don't say this critically, I'm just trying to understand, there wouldn't be any difference for this policy for a Phillipstown resident who doesn't live in the village versus a tourist. We're treated the same?
That's correct. You're loved more, but yes, you're.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I just have some underlying concern about how that might affect the sense of community, but I know this will play out.
Yeah, I hope that it won't. I hope that some of these fears and some of the sensibilities that are being expressed won't be realized or won't be offended by this in practice. Okay.
Yes.
But again, I think that we're going to have to see how it's going to work for a certain period of time before we actually know. And I don't think there's really any way to anticipate every single, concern, every single individual concern. What we've tried to do is to deal with group concerns. So.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, I know there are a few people with hands raised who have spoken previously, so I'm trying to get to people who have not spoken yet, and then I'll get back to those who are on the second round. So we're at Michael Mueller. Please unmute yourself and give your name and address, please.
Yeah, hi, Michael Mueller, 43 Garden Street. That property is on the corner of Garden and Northern. So my question and concern is about the proposed metered parking between Fair and Garden. It's on that stretch that I have been parking for the last 27 years. So first question is, are you proposing the same hours as the other metered parking, that it would be just weekends and holidays, or how would that work?
Yes.
Okay.
Same. Yeah.
And on weekends and holidays, it would be between certain hours?
Yes. If you look at the slide, Michael, was it? Yeah. If you look at the slide, I think it's slide 9, Michael.
Here it is. Here it is, Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and you're right. We don't segment out the metered within the residential parking, and we should actually. But yes, it would be a weekend and holiday from 10 to 5 only.
So just between 10 and 5 weekends and holidays.
That's correct.
Right. So, but during that time, even though that parking is directly in front of my house, I would have to pay to park there.
Well, you would also be eligible for a parking permit as well, or
Right,
perhaps,
right.
or
True,
perhaps.
but I mean, as things stand now, on Garden Street, I really can hardly ever find a parking spot on Garden Street as it is.
Yes, but that's because some of the time, some of those cars parking on Garden Street are not now residents of Garden Street. And Garden Street would, for all intents and purposes, be dedicated to residents, so that you would have a priority of parking spaces on Garden Street.
Well, I guess we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, and again, the effort here is not to make things worse, it's to make things better. And that involves a certain balancing of the various interests and constituencies. And we won't know how well we've done that until we get a more refined proposal package for everyone to look at, and then how it plays out. Also, one of the advantages of the parking meter system is that if we decide that metering on weekends, let's say not in the peak season, isn't required by the intent, the number of cars, then it can be turned off without difficulty. It's completely flexible that way. So we can respond to changing situations with the app-based meter. I do want to get back to something, another comment, and that was the weakness of our bandwidth. And that is an issue, and that is something that the committee has discussed. So I don't want you to leave this meeting without the group without realizing that has been raised and is a concern. I think that was Greg's concern. So.
Okay, Martha Mikalakis.
Yes, hi. I'm at 164 Main Street, and we've lived here since 2007, and also lived in the city for 20 years. And so, I understand how the parking dances can work. And my concern is that, or just to point out, is that, for instance, and this is just a hypothetical, say if I knew that the weekend was coming and I moved my car early over to one of the free spots on Northern Avenue that's taking up one of the spots that are supposed to be for other people. And it just feels like maybe something that we are doing is shuffling things around, but not necessarily addressing the problem. Is just an observation and just a thought. Yes. And so and so, there was the woman and she talked about coming down and not having a spot. And it just seems like, are we making a complex set of rules that are going to mostly adversely affect people that live in the town?
I hope not, Martha. That's certainly not the intention, and we are very conscious of unintended consequences of all of the proposals that we're looking at. We are moving things around, though. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we're dealing with the allocation of a scarce resource. We do have a limited supply of places to park, and we have a demand that at certain times exceeds that. And so what we're trying to do is to move it around, but move it around in a way that alleviates some of the impacts of the problem. The problem itself is that too many people come here in automobiles. Yeah. For a village our size and a village that's situated the way ours is, that's the problem. And no, we are not addressing the problem of too many people coming by automobiles. That's a larger issue, and certainly outside the purview of this committee. What we're doing is trying to address the impact of the problem.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think that, I mean, with the past year and so many people not riding the trains, it seemed like there were more people coming in cars because they weren't taking the train. I mean, do you anticipate that maybe it will ease up a little bit as things open up more and people are out more and taking public transportation more?
I can't say. No one can predict that, but I sit down in the visitors information booth, or have, last year did certainly. And my observation, one person's observation, is that the majority of people coming off the train, and this is pre-COVID, were hikers, okay, not shoppers. And so the majority of the train, the people who disembarked from the train walked up Main Street and either bought some water or something, and then took the left on Fair and then walked up to the trail. So I don't know whether, in other words, an increase in train traffic is going to alleviate the car traffic. Just don't know.
I'm sorry, I know we were supposed to kind of limit the number of questions, but I know that you had said that no change in infrastructure was considered, but doesn't that seem like something like that, or even moving it outside the town in some kind of shuttle service, or just that we need more spaces?
Well, that may be, but there's a school of thought that says if you create more spaces, you create more traffic. I don't think anyone on the committee is opposed to other steps being taken outside the brief that we were given. But by the time, I will just tell you, having had a lot of experience in development and public policy in urban areas, by the time you go through the process of manifesting that kind of a project, your problem is surrounding you, is simply, you're up to your ears in the problem. So what we were tasked with doing was to see what could be done with the tools at hand, basically, okay? It may not be enough at the end of the day.
Just have one other question, because when you were talking about the permits for $10 a year, I was just, $10 a year was what it was proposed, correct?
Yes, correct. That's the figure we're working with.
Very much. I mean, if we're looking for revenue.
Right. But we are not looking for revenue from the resident parking streets. We are looking for revenue from the meters. If you think that the permit should be higher, then make the suggestion. Okay.
I mean, for instance, we are not going to be eligible for one, and we would pay more for one. I mean, because we're not, we don't have access for it. So that's just, it was just a thought.
Okay, understood.
Okay.
Jack, I just want to let you know I have gone over the time because I thought people's concerns were important, and there were so many people that wanted to share. I added additional time to this, but I know you're not done with the presentation.
Right.
Would you like to go on to the rest of the presentation?
Yeah, if I could have the next two slides, please.
No. I just want to make sure that we do actually address this with all of you guys in attendance at the end of the meeting,
Okay,
like the rest of the questions.
She had a question.
well, I'll give you a half hour, okay? But
But Jack, maybe you should take her question because she did ask it and it was.
shoot, go ahead. Okay, I'm fine with that. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically I'm just saying, I know that you guys said that there may be allotted parking spots, but I just want to say that like our store personally, we employ 5 people
Okay,
and only 4 of those people drive in. I personally live 25 minutes away. And so if I have to park all the way at the top of Main Street to walk into work, that's going to add a lot of time onto my commute. And especially if I have to like carry things into the store. But if, let's say, there's not enough employee parking and we have to pay for it during the week, that's going to be $8.75, or it'll be.
no, wait. I'm not making myself clear. There is no charge during the week. During the week, there is no charge. There is no meter during the week. It's turned off.
I thought you said that was just a suggestion and not.
No. That's the proposal. And again, if you go to slide 9, you'll see Main Street from 9D down to Depot Square is only metered from 10 to, I can't see, it's too small. Okay, thank you. 10 to 5 on weekends or holidays. So during the week, there is no metering. And on weekends, you would have a reserved spot if Greg applied for the permit. And yes, you would have a longer wall.
So we would only have to apply for permits whenever we have, because we still have at least 3 or 4 people working on the weekends that are driving in from out of town. And if there weren't permits for them, they would have to move their car every 3 hours and also pay for parking.
If they parked on Main Street.
Or in the municipal lots.
Or in the municipal lot, but they could park in the Metro North lot.
That's true, but if they're not able to get there early enough to be able to fight with visitors.
Well, again, there will be, and we might as, I mean, it's evident that there will be inconveniences attached possibly to some of this. Okay, what we're trying to do is to reduce them to the absolute minimum. And so, I mean, I'm going to be inconvenienced by it if it goes ahead myself. Everyone on the committee, except the mayor who gets a spot, is going to be possibly inconvenienced by it. So I don't want you to think that it's possible to solve all of the problem for every individual, or that every individual is going to like what the impact is. But
I feel like it's less about liking it and more about like you're punishing hourly employees to come to work.
No, we are not punishing. What we are trying to do is to fit hourly employees. Listen, we have spent a lot of time trying to accommodate the needs of hourly employees to the extent that we possibly can.
Yeah, because we make a lot less than the people that are purchasing homes in Cold Spring, especially over the last couple of years.
Well, again, you're making assumptions here, and I heard about it. I mean, I read a memo that was circulated today about privileged people on the side streets as opposed to people on Main Street, and I think it just makes more sense to say, this isn't working for me personally. This is my objection to it. And can you work on this and see if you can improve it rather than, assigning and making assumptions that I think are not accurate. There are no gated communities on the side streets. Basically, you have working families who are raising children and who are dealing with a certain overwhelming problem in certain cases due to the changing nature of this village. So if you're going to take anything personally, take personally the fact that we are really trying to do our best to respond to all of the constituencies at the same time. There is no bias at work here. There certainly is not a economic bias at work.
I really hope so, and I'm really looking forward to like further meetings, like discussing this, because I feel like that's something that needs to be considered. If there's not enough spots, you're forcing people to pay for parking to come to work.
Caitlin, I also, I'm on the committee. I'm Rebecca Ramirez. I'm the owner of the Cold Spring Cheese Shop. And I just kind of wanted to respond to your concern, because we know that parking touches everyone. And that's why we're having this meeting right now, because we want to shape it with the concerns that are here. And mainly our residents and our employees, our workforce is very important to us. But I just wanted to say that with the high costs that come with free parking, the town is actually, the village and our population is actually impacted if we don't make a change. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many cars, they are all creating carbon emissions. And right now, I'm not sure if you know about the Climate Smart Task Force, but there's leaders in our town that are trying to reduce the number of carbon emissions. This would help that by creating turnover and not allowing for the constant going around in circles looking for a parking spot. If we create the right price on Main Street, that means that there will always be 2 or 3 spots available for people when they arrive, which will allow our locals to be able to access the Main Street on weekends when they are not able to access it right now in vehicles. And I'm talking about like town or even region, somebody coming from Beacon or Peekskill. But also, I know that, I have employees too. We're lucky that we have one paid parking spot that we pay for behind our store. We know that we have to make everyone is going to have to make a small sacrifice for this bigger vision that will help everybody. We're hoping that this plan helps everybody, even though it might not seem like it is. We are hoping, we're shaping that goal being in mind. Jack was very great at looking at the unbanked, right? Like the people that we perhaps were not thinking about. And that the free proposed lots came out of that. Who are these people that are going to be impacted? So we hope that it actually, if and when it is put into place, that you don't feel like it is so detrimental to your life.
Yeah, it's not just my life. I'm just speaking up for all the hourly workers that work on Main Street, but I do appreciate you guys considering that. And I know that there are meetings going forward. I just feel like this wasn't considered, because if your most loyal customers would be people that work in Cold Spring, the people that would pay the most money. So I just think that should be considered going forward.
Oh, the last thing, this is an important point. So that revenue that is being generated is actually going to help our village because of the costs. So we are, some of the costs that could be paid for are street repairs, sidewalks, even some of the workers, like to pay for the cleaning of the bathrooms could be a possible expense. So the money generated will hopefully improve the quality of life here.
Yeah, I would hope so, but it's also not really, it's not great on other people's quality of life that are actually working at the businesses that bring in the visitors to Cold Spring.
I think we should move along. It's getting close to 9, and there's a few more slides to go through. So can we finish up on that and then take questions at whatever time is left?
Okie doke. This is just an illustration of the signs that for the Metro North parking, to make it clear that it is free parking and the hours that it's free parking. And as I say, this was a major effort to reach this point. In the past, Metro North has not objected to people parking free on weekends, but they were hesitant to let the village advertise that it was available for parking. And so that is a considerable step forward. And I think Dave deserves the credit for the many hours of negotiation involved. And so can we have 13, please? Okay, this is just a picture of the potential additional free parking area that this is an a bird's eye view, excuse me, of the municipal parking lot. And behind it, that pile of debris that you see is actually, there's a village-owned site underneath that. And were that to be cleared, we're estimating that we would get another 24 free and unlimited parking spots there. Okay. So let me go on to the fourth proposal, which is less of a proposal than a necessity. And that is, if we in fact do enact all of these proposals in some sort of comprehensive way, it's going to be vitally important that we get the word out that these changes are in place and drive people to whatever information we create to explain where these various kinds of parking options are located. And that's going to be a matter that's going to involve the public and the private sector, largely through online pages. And we will ask the Chamber of Commerce to be involved. We will ask the County of Tourism to be involved. Many of the local restaurants and hotels and other members of the entertainment industry have their own web pages. We have two newspapers with online editions, and we have radio stations, local radio stations largely, but regional ones as well, that do have PSA programs. And we will develop spots such as, be aware for those people who are going to the beautiful village of Cold Spring, there have been changes in the parking regulations, and, hop on to the village site, there's a special page. All right, because what we don't want is for this all to result in mass confusion. There will be confusion to a certain degree at the beginning, no doubt. Plus, people who are not familiar with an app-based kind of metering system is another level of confusion. So it's going to take a community effort to get the word out, whatever that word ends up being. That's the public information campaign. And for next steps, there will need to be a public hearing, which is a formal public hearing in which final documents will be posted and open for comment and discussion. And there is the comments and suggestions in the public hearing will be taken into consideration as they must be in any public hearing, and may or may not result in significant changes to the proposals. But that is the normal procedure to be followed. And that public hearing will deal both with the parking recommendations and also how they are articulated in the pertinent code sections in the village code as well. So that's where you will get specific technical language for comment and consideration, which can be, it is technical language. So I have always favored in those cases a plain language version for people to to see at the same time. CEQA, we have, the village has has determined that this is that all of these proposals do not rise to the level of negative environmental impact, and so has filed that determination with the state. And then finally, were these proposals to be approved in some form or another, there are signage requirements that the village will have to undertake, which relate to the parking in the residential parking areas. As I mentioned before, if we move ahead with the app-based metering, Park Mobile provides free of charge signs related to that. And those signs have both a Q code on them, they have an app address, and they have an 800 number, so people can access the system through those various ways.
Yeah, we have 8. I'm sorry, we have 8 people waiting for questions. Some
Okay.
have not spoken before.
Okay.
So I'd like to pull them up, and those, I'm not sure we'll get to everyone, but we'll cover that when we get to it. Tara Vamos, ask everybody to please keep your questions very short because we're very much out of time here. Tara, please unmute yourself. Tara?
Can you hear? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Hang on. I'm gonna hang up my phone.
Tara, you're breaking up.
Can you hear me still?
Vaguely, yes. We need your name and address, please.
Okay. My name is Tara Vamos. I live at 6 Rock Street.
Okay.
And, I wanted to thank you all profusely for doing this, for working on it. I want to thank yourself, Fran, and Dave Morandi for being on the parking committee in addition to being on the village board. I appreciate the time and effort that went into this. It's a crazy amount of effort. I hear a lot of people giving feedback that sound to me a little bit like they're not aware of what the situation is currently, because I feel like if an employee drives into Cold Spring at noon on a Saturday, I don't know where they're parking and how long they're spending looking for parking. I think they might actually be saving time if they were going directly to some of the designated spots that you had kind of penciled out in the plan and walking in from there. I also wanted to just echo that people had spoken about the condos possibly needing some more consideration as far as parking. And also maybe it would be possible on the signage too. I'm not clear with the, is it possible through the 800 number to pay for your parking if you do not have
Yes.
any? Okay, all right, that's great. And also, like, if there was a sign that indicated that where there is free parking that you can get to where you don't need a phone at all, because
Yes.
I know some people that travel with no phones. But that's it. I think this is going to be a great improvement, and I very much appreciate you guys trying to put the effort into figuring it out and in such a detailed, careful way. And also what you said about the fact that all of this stuff is things that we can try, and if it doesn't work in 3 months or in 2 months, we could roll it back and switch it. So I just think it's a fantastic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea, excuse me, Chelsea Mosen.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking my question. My name is Chelsea Mosen. I live at 15 High Street. And I just wanted to ask a question or maybe voice a concern about what I understand to be that Haldane Street between 90 and High is being made one way. And the one-way nature doesn't concern me, but the direction of the one-way is of concern. My kitchen window, actually, my sink is, looks right out onto that intersection, directly across from it. I watch it many hours in the day, and cars just do not obey the stop sign there. And because it is so close to Tots Park, for me, that's a safety concern. I would much prefer, if we need to make that street one way, that it's going the other direction. I was wondering if that might be considered possibly in the next revision of this plan.
I know that that opinion has been expressed by several people who live up in that area. And all I can say is that I think there's been no final decision made on anything. I think there are strong opinions on both sides of that. And I think whatever the committee, and anyone please on the committee stop me, I think whatever the committee ultimately decides to do, it will be a matter of which rationale appears to be the most compelling. Okay, but I understand, and I know the whole committee understands, that there is a difference of opinion on this one that's not been resolved yet.
Chelsea, there was a letter that was shared with the committee today with a list of several residents that have voiced their opinion. I would just recommend that if there is any additional residents that you know that have not voiced their opinion to the village, to please have them call or email.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jen Zwarg, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Hi, thanks, Fran. Thanks, Jack, for this presentation. I missed the very beginning, so maybe my question is moot, but I wanted to echo something that Rebecca said earlier, that I think all residents of the village on this call and that are interested in this should consider. And that is the trade-off between the inconvenience that we all will, in different ways, have to endure with this change in policy versus what the village is gaining from it. And I would suggest to the parking committee, if you didn't already say this at the beginning of the meeting, if you could make public projected revenues from the meters, that would really, I think, help, because what you're doing is not increasing taxes for people in the village, and you're trying to get revenue for the toilets and beautification and the sidewalks, et cetera, in some of the only ways that we have available to us as the village. And if you could make projected revenue, even if it was just a guesstimate, public, I think that would give village residents who are impacted by this a better sense of what the gains are from it, that aren't just the gains, which will hopefully be alleviating some of the parking issues that people deal with in different ways. That's my main comment.
Thanks, Jen.
Jen, could you give us your address?
Oh, sorry. I'm at 192 Main Street in Cold Spring. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Jackie Hadden, please.
Hi, Jackie Hadden, 23 High Street, for the past 23 years. Adding to Chelsea's comment, I'm one of the signatures on the letter, kind of disagreeing with the direction choice that Haldane Street might undergo. If I'm going to go out of town, I'm going to go via Northern, or I'm going to go via Haldane. I'm not going to go via Main because I can't see either direction. So if Haldane becomes one way, that kind of leaves Northern as the exit for all of us on this end of the street, which for some people, if they're parked on the street, means they're going to have to pull a U. But yesterday there was a baseball game, and I went out and I counted 16 cars parked on Northern, which is great, but it's also probably how the street is going to look once free parking is a factor there. People are going to be drawn to that street. So to try to navigate that street with 1/3 of it taken by parked cars pretty much eliminates a good option for us to exit. So if Haldane went the other direction If it went from High Street to 9D, I think that would solve many more problems than it would create.
Thank you, Jackie. There are 4 people waiting to speak who have already spoken, and it is now a little after 9. Are we going to continue? Are we going to, it's not my call.
We have 1
Jack.
minute and 40 seconds if you want to take one more question.
I've got, okay, Bo, you've got short period of time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I wanted to speak a bit about the slide that was the one about the number 3 slide, the number 3 proposal with the spaces. I think there's a lot more to be said about this proposal, and there's a lot that hasn't been allowed to speak. And I think that those of us who tried to fit our comments and questions into the specific part like you asked and were told that we would be able to speak later, I think there definitely needs to be a longer and maybe a second public comment period for this that's not the final one, but that is yet another draft period where there are a lot of opinions that still need to be discussed. But I wanted to discuss this slide. Thank you for bringing it up. I'm curious if the 20% of the RPP is designated for certain spots, and if so, why that would be designated as far from Main Street as possible on Northern Avenue, when instead you could designate it as close to Main Street as possible on the sides of the more privileged streets, such as High Church and Garden, which get their own permits, thereby alleviating the pain on the residents of the more affected streets, such as Main Street, to access those free spaces. I also question why there would ever be meters with the 44 or 24 extra spaces when you could also make those free spaces designated to the people who are the most affected by this, because in the beginning of this meeting, you mentioned that there were 3 goals, and goal number 1 was to reduce parking hassles on the village residents. And speaking as a resident of 50 Main Street, with this proposal where you are giving spots to people such as those on the parking committee who are going to get permits in front of their homes, the people on Main Street are completely unconsidered, and we are taxpayers and we are voters, and some of us have been here all of our lives. Some of us have been here many years and raised our children here, and we are being completely left out unless we want to be stuck on a place that's as far walking from us as possible. And if we come in when we have things such as groceries to drop off or sick children on the weekend, we're going to have to basically pay to park or risk getting parking tickets, such as I got last summer when I double parked for 10 minutes with a sick child. And the Cold Spring Police, although my neighbor told them that I was a resident, wrote me a ticket anyway. And even during the weekdays, we're no longer going to be able to use the spaces on the side streets, which we rely on because we aren't supposed to park on Main Street, and we want to leave those spots open for our employees of our businesses that we love having here, for our fellow residents, and for other people who are coming in. So if all of those spots are taken from us during the week, then we're going to be stuck out of the way, because there's still going to be problems if you implement this 7 days a week just for the residential parking permit. So I would ask that in your considerations, you either delay the entire program until you can make a more equitable and fair program for all residents of the village, rather than just those who live on the 11 streets on the sides that you mentioned, or you implement only the meters or only the residential parking program, because I think the village needs to decide whether the goal is revenue or whether the goal is to alleviate the hassle on residents. Because with what you're proposing now, you're going to be increasing hassle on residents if you have the meters and you have the residential parking program in place. So
Bo.
Yes.
Number one, I would ask that you go through this proposal carefully. And I did not say that the highway department, the 24 spaces would be metered. They're under proposed free and dedicated parking. So that's number one.
Yeah, but Jack, those are still pushed far away from Main Street, as are Northern Avenue, as are Kimball Avenue.
Bo, let me try to answer some of your questions, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Because I don't think at this point, what's being proposed is anger worthy, okay? We have offered here a status report of our thinking, the committee's thinking up to this stage. And we did that because we need to uncover the kind of responses and concerns that you as an individual are the only person can give us. All right. We have not interviewed every citizen on Main Street or in the RPP district. And so we are relying on this process going forward, informed with exactly the kind of problems you're sharing with us.
So Jack, would you consider having adding some Main Street representation to the committee so that we can actually have that discussion rather than only having the village board and
Bo,
Garden Street representation?
let me finish answering the questions you've already made and not answer questions which are outside my decision-making capacity anyway. I am not the chair of the committee. I am simply a member of the committee who was asked to take a lead on making the presentation, okay? So that's one thing, setting aside. And now you're making me lose my famous train of thought. If you think that an incremental implementation of what you're seeing now is a better way to go, then that, again, is a legitimate recommendation that you should make to the committee, okay? But if at all possible, if you can isolate what your recommendations are based on your own personal situation and put them down in writing, because we don't have the opportunity right now, the time, and I certainly don't have the energy left tonight and nor is it my place. And this is just to pause for a moment. People have complimented me on occasion during the presentation. This is a committee effort that you're listening to. And there were no first among equals on the committee. So I think you should realize that I believe the committee was originally constituted to represent informally people of different experiences and attitude. We understand that the residents on Main Street, because Main Street is a B1 district and was not included 3 years ago in the original legislation, need special treatment, okay? It's not that we are unaware of that. Now, maybe the special treatment that we have devised so far doesn't meet your needs and you can improve on it. But again, the process going forward is to take the kind of feedback that you're giving us. If you give it to me, give it to us in a kind of organized fashion so that we can deal with it and see what we can do with it. Cement
Jack,
the proposal.
Jack, I'd like to just interrupt just for a sec.
Okay.
I think we're at a point where this could go on for a long time, and it's also a point, like you just mentioned, energy is low, and dragging on. So one thing that we had already talked about at our last meeting was that we might have another meeting. The next meeting that the committee has, one of the suggestions was we're going to talk about what transpired tonight. We're also going to be looking at maybe we have another meeting. So to answer more questions. So that's another thing that we've already thought may be necessary. I think right now we should adjourn this meeting. I think it's one of those points. I know when I get into a meeting, it doesn't become productive. And so I would suggest that we adjourn tonight, and the committee will meet on Wednesday and decide how to proceed. We can either have another meeting, go to a public, or maybe something else that I'm not thinking of.
Dave, for those,
at all times, and one other thing is everyone that is on can write anytime, email. You can email to either myself, a board member, or the village clerk if you have comments and stuff that you would like to say. And we look and read everything. So,
Thank you. Thanks, Dave and Jack. I thought that this was the time to make those suggestions, but we can certainly send them in. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Bo.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for joining tonight. This obviously will continue, and as Jack said, you know that this isn't cast in stone, and we'll be working on it. So, thank you, Jack, for a great presentation. Nice job.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, Jack, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, we don't need a motion or whatever. We'll adjourn for tonight and be back. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you all. Good night, all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hmm.